My name is Riley Mercer. I'm 35 years old, and if you had told me a year ago that being abandoned in the woods by my boyfriend and his friends would end up saving my life, I probably would have laughed in your face. Not because it sounded impossible, because back then, I was still the kind of woman who thought surviving disrespect counted as loyalty. I didn't even want to go on that stupid cabin trip. Every year, my boyfriend and his friends did this little bonding retreat thing they all acted like was sacred. In reality, it was just 7 adults drinking expensive coffee in ugly sweaters, pretending they were emotionally evolved while talking trash about people who weren't there. I had dodged it for 3 years. Every time the invitation came up, I found a reason not to go. I had to stay late at the shop. My manager needed me. We were backed up with repairs. Something always came up. The funny part was, none of those excuses were lies. My manager always needed something, mostly because he was a lazy, loud-mouthed man who thought barking orders counted as leadership. I'd been a mechanic since I was 18. Cars made sense to me. Engines, timing, pressure, cause, and effect. If something was broken, there was a reason. If it made a strange sound, you listened long enough and you could trace it back to the source. People weren't like that. People lied while smiling. People hurt you and called it a joke. People looked you dead in the eye and told you they were helping while they made you smaller. My manager, Larry, was 50 and useless in ways that should have required talent. He strutted around the garage like he built the place with his bare hands, shouting my name across the floor every 10 minutes like volume alone made him important. Riley! Always like that. Loud enough for customers to hear. Then he'd waddle over after I'd already diagnosed the problem, already fixed half of it, and stand there nodding like he'd done something. Told my people what to look for, he'd say, chest puffed out. Yeah, sure. The only thing Larry ever found consistently was a new way to take credit for other people's work. So between that circus and my boyfriend Evan, constantly sighing about how I never did anything social, I wasn't exactly thriving. I worked too much. I got paid too little. I came home too tired to pretend I cared about cocktail nights and curated group photos. And somehow, that still made me the difficult one. I liked quiet. I liked being left alone. I liked not having to perform enthusiasm every second of the day. Apparently, in Evan's world, that was some kind of character flaw. This year, he refused to take no for an answer. Everyone wants you there this time, babe, he told me on Thursday night, while leaning against my kitchen counter like he was being charming. I laughed before I could stop myself. Yeah, I said. I'm sure they're all dying to spend a weekend with the antisocial mechanic who ruins everybody's vibe by not pretending to enjoy guided trust exercises. He gave me that look. That soft, patient, irritated look men use when they've already decided you're being unreasonable, but want credit for staying calm about it. Can you not do that? He asked. Do what? Make everything sound ridiculous. I folded my arms. I don't have to make it sound ridiculous, Evan. It comes like that naturally. He sighed through his nose and stepped closer. It's one weekend. My friends are trying. I'm trying. I just want you to meet me halfway for once. That line worked on me longer than it should have. Meet me halfway. As if I hadn't spent the last 2 years bending myself into a version of a woman who was easier to explain to his friends. A version who smiled more, talked softer, didn't roll her eyes when Maddie started talking about energy shifts and boundaries right after insulting somebody behind their back. Didn't tense up when everyone laughed a little too long after her sarcasm. Didn't notice the way Evan always became slightly different around them. More polished, more performative, more willing to act like I was some rough edge he was graciously sanding down. But I was tired, too tired to fight over it. So I went. We packed up Maddie's SUV early Saturday morning. 6 people, 1 vehicle, too many bags, too much perfume. The second we pulled onto the highway, I knew I'd made a mistake. Evan sat in the front with Maddie, laughing harder than necessary at some podcast I could barely hear over the road noise. I was crammed in the back with 2 of his other friends, shoulders brushing every time the car hit a pothole, surrounded by low voices and private smiles. Every time I looked up, someone was smirking. Every time I spoke, the conversation hiccuped for half a second before starting again somewhere else. I tried staring out the window. Trees blurred past in long green streaks. Towns thinned out. Cell service dipped. The farther we drove, the quieter my phone got, until even the outside world seemed to forget I existed. At one point, I half joked, "You all sure this is a cabin trip and not the opening scene of a true crime documentary?" Nobody laughed. That was what got me. Normally, they would have laughed, even fake laughed, just to keep the mood light. But this time there was a pause, a flicker, a glance passed from the front seat to the back. Then Maddie smiled too brightly and said, "Riley, you are so dark." Occupational hazard, I muttered. Evan turned around and flashed me a smile that didn't touch his eyes. You could at least try to have fun. I looked at him for a second. That fake easy tone, that subtle warning under it. Behave. That was always the translation. Behave. Don't make this hard. Don't make me choose between defending you and keeping things smooth. So I leaned my head back and said nothing. We drove for hours. Eventually, the paved road gave way to dirt, and then the dirt got rough enough to feel like we were driving over old bones. Pines closed in on both sides. The sunlight thinned into long, cold strips between branches. My phone finally gave up completely. No service. The road narrowed into something that looked less like a route and more like a suggestion. You sure this is the right way? I asked. Or are we just trusting Maddie's spiritual connection to Google Maps? That got a few polite laughs, but again, something about it felt off. Tense. Measured. Then finally the cabin appeared. Big wooden structure sitting on a wide patch of dirt, surrounded by so many trees. It looked like the world had been trimmed away around it. No neighboring houses, no porch lights in the distance, nothing but silence and the ticking sound of the SUV engine cooling after the ride. The air smelled like pine, damp earth, and old rain. Cute, right? Maddie said, hopping out first. Depends, I said as I climbed down after her. Do you enjoy places where murders stay unsolved? A couple of them laughed politely. Nobody denied it. I helped unload bags while the others ran around reacting to everything like they were filming one of those fake cozy getaway videos. Evan pointed out the fireplace. Someone squealed over the creaky floors. Maddie kept talking about rustic charm like she'd discovered the woods personally. I carried in our luggage and tried not to let my unease show. Inside, the cabin was exactly the kind of place that could either heal you or swallow you whole. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, main room with an old couch and a stone fireplace, small kitchen with wooden cabinets, and a window overlooking nothing but trees. Dust in the corners, curtains that smelled faintly musty, a silence underneath the voices that made every laugh sound a little too sharp. At dinner, the weirdness got worse. They kept sharing inside jokes I wasn't part of. Every time I asked what was funny, someone waved it off with an, "Oh, nothing," in exactly the tone that meant it was absolutely about me. Evan was overly nice the whole night. That was another red flag. Not warm, not loving, nice. The kind of nice people use when they're managing a situation. When I stood up to help clean, Maddie grinned and said, "You've done enough today, hero." I stared at her. What does that even mean? She laughed into her wineglass. Nothing. Relax. There it was again. Relax. The favorite word of people doing something they know is wrong. Later, Evan found me alone near the sink and leaned against the counter. You okay? He asked. Yeah, I said, just soaking in all the fresh air and completely normal tension. He rolled his eyes like I was exhausting. Can you please not start? Start what? This thing you do where you act like everyone's out to get you. I let out a short laugh because that one almost impressed me. The confidence of saying something like that while I sat in a cabin full of people acting weird around me. Maybe everyone should stop behaving like cartoon villains then. Riley. There was warning in his voice now. Not concern, not curiosity. Control. I looked at him, and for one strange second, I had the sharpest, coldest feeling that I was missing something obvious. Like a room full of people had rehearsed around me, and I'd shown up without a script. But I was tired. Too tired to pull at the thread. So I just said, I'm going to bed. He exhaled like he was frustrated with me, then softened his face and touched my arm. Try to have fun. For me? That line again. For me. I gave him a smile that fooled neither of us. Sure. That night I barely slept. Every sound in the cabin felt loaded. Floorboards shifting, distant laughter that stopped too fast. A door opening and closing somewhere down the hall. I lay there staring at the dark ceiling, listening to the quiet between noises and thinking the same thought over and over. Something is off. Something is off. Something is off. By the time I finally drifted off, my stomach was tight with it. The next morning, I woke up later than everyone else. That was my first thought anyway. I figured they were already making breakfast or taking one of those staged morning photos people post with captions like, disconnect to reconnect while secretly checking who liked it. But the cabin was too quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Empty quiet. I pulled on my jeans, shoved my hands through my hair, and walked into the main room. Nothing. No voices. No music. No coffee brewing. No Evan. No bags by the door. No jackets thrown over chairs. I stopped in the middle of the room and just stood there. At first, my brain tried to explain it away. Maybe they'd gone for a walk. Maybe a hike. Maybe they were outside. I checked the kitchen. Nothing. Then I saw it. A bright yellow sticky note in the center of the table. I picked it up. 3 words. Build some character. Underneath it was a stupid little smiley face. That was it. No explanation. No, be back later. No, check your phone. Just those 3 words written like this was funny. For a second, I honestly thought I was still half asleep. Then I heard it. Laughter. Loud, sharp, cruel. I turned toward the front window just in time to see Maddie's SUV bouncing away down the dirt path. Evan was in the passenger seat. One of the others had a phone held up, recording. And the sound coming through those open windows. God! They were laughing so hard they were practically folding over themselves. I didn't think, I just moved. I threw the front door open so hard it slammed against the wall and ran barefoot onto the porch. Are you kidding me? I screamed. The SUV didn't slow down, didn't stop, didn't even hesitate. It just kept going, their laughter trailing behind them as the vehicle rounded the bend and disappeared into the trees. Dust rose in the road after them, hanging in the air like smoke. I stood there frozen, barefoot, hair a mess, sticky note crushed in my fist. For a long second, the humiliation hit harder than the anger. It felt hot, physical, like something had climbed up inside my chest and was pressing against my ribs. They had planned it. Every whisper in the car, every weird smile, every fake little check-in, every time Evan asked if I'd packed enough, every second of that drive. Planned. I grabbed my phone and looked at the screen, even though I already knew what it would say. No service. Of course. That was when the truth settled in completely. This wasn't some thoughtless joke that got out of hand. This was organized, deliberate. They wanted a reaction. They wanted panic, wanted tears, begging. Maybe some shaky video of me finally learning how not to be such a difficult, quiet, inconvenient woman. I went back inside and stared at the cabin with new eyes. There was food in the kitchen. Eggs, soup, bread, a few canned things, coffee, enough to survive for a while, which somehow made it worse. Because it meant they had thought it through just enough to make themselves feel less cruel. Not enough to make it safe. Not enough to make it right. Just enough that later they could say, "Oh my God, relax. We didn't leave you with nothing." For a minute, I considered trying to walk out. But where? I didn't know the area. No signal. No map. No idea how far the nearest road with actual people might be. I stood there in the middle of that silent room, holding that crumpled note, and felt something inside me shift. Not heal. Not yet. But shift. The anger was still there, the shame too. But underneath both of them was something else. Stillness. I sat down on the porch steps and looked out at the trees. No engines. No barking manager. No boyfriend sighing at me because I wasn't smiling enough for his friends. No one asking me to be softer, warmer, easier. Just wind. Just quiet. Just me. I don't know how long I sat there before I finally muttered, "All right then." My own voice sounded strange in the open air. I looked down at the note again. Build some character. A laugh slipped out of me then, dry and humorless. "You really thought of this would break me," I whispered. Then I stood up, squared my shoulders, and looked around the property. If they expected me to collapse, they were going to be disappointed. The cabin had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a fireplace, a small kitchen, and enough basic supplies to last at least several days if I stretched them. There were old flashlights in one drawer, a toolkit under the sink, a box of matches, a rusted shovel by the back porch, and chopped wood stacked against the wall outside. Whoever owned this place had known how to live out here. And me? I knew how to work with what I had. So I cleaned the kitchen, made coffee with an old percolator I found shoved in the back of a cabinet. Then I sat by the window with a hot mug in both hands and stared out at the trees while the silence wrapped around me. For the first time in years, I drank coffee while it was still hot. No one interrupted me. No one complained. No one asked me to smile. By late afternoon, I walked the property. There was a shed half hidden behind vines and brush, old enough to look like it might collapse if I breathed on it wrong. I made a note to check it later. Behind the cabin, the trees opened slightly toward what sounded like running water somewhere in the distance. A creek, maybe. The sky turned orange by evening. I built a fire, heated up soup, sat alone on the old couch while the cabin crackled softly around me. And somewhere in the middle of that first night alone, with the flames throwing shadows across the walls and the humiliation still sitting bitter in my chest, another thought rose quietly behind it. Maybe they had made one fatal mistake. Maybe they had confused abandonment with punishment. Maybe they didn't understand that I had already been lonely for a long time. I looked at the fire and said into the empty room, "Guess I'll build some character then." This time when I said it, I meant it. The next morning, I woke up without an alarm. No engine noise. No manager barking my name across the garage. No boyfriend sighing because I wasn't in the mood to socialize before coffee. Just wind brushing against the cabin walls and the soft, uneven ticking of an old clock somewhere in the main room. For the first few seconds, I didn't move. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling that strange, unfamiliar emptiness inside my chest. Not pain, not exactly peace either. More like the silence had cleared enough space for me to hear my own thoughts again. And that alone felt dangerous. Back in the city, there was always something loud enough to drown me out. Work, traffic, notifications, Evan's voice, his friends. That constant low hum of expectation pressing down on me from every direction. Out here, there was nowhere to hide from myself. So I got up, made breakfast, a couple of eggs, toast in an old skillet, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Then I started going through the cabin properly. If I was going to be stuck there for more than a day, I needed to know exactly what I had. The place wasn't big, but it was old in that sturdy, practical way that made you think it had seen a lot and survived most of it. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, main room with a fireplace and mismatched furniture. Small kitchen with more cabinets than food, though there was enough to get by for a while if I rationed. The drawers were full of odd little leftovers from other lives. Old batteries, twine, a deck of cards missing 3 kings, a cracked lantern globe wrapped in newspaper. In the back bedroom closet, I found a stack of heavy blankets that smelled like cedar and dust. Under one of the beds, there was a fishing net and a single muddy boot with no match. The whole place felt abandoned, but not forgotten. Like someone had once loved it enough to keep leaving pieces of themselves behind. Around mid-morning, I found the journals. They were stacked on a low shelf beside the fireplace, half hidden behind a warped wooden box. Leather-bound, dust-coated, pages gone soft and yellow at the edges. I carried them to this table, brushed them off, and started flipping through. Most were decades old. The earliest entries were from a family who used the cabin every summer. Notes about fishing at the creek, patching leaks in the roof, a daughter who hated mosquitoes, a son who kept trying to catch frogs barehanded. Grocery lists, weather complaints, tiny domestic details from people who had no idea a stranger would be reading their lives years later. It should have felt intrusive. Instead, it felt weirdly comforting. Proof that the place had held laughter before mine. Proof that isolation and loneliness weren't the same thing. One of the later journals caught my attention because the handwriting changed. Cleaner, sharper, more deliberate. It belonged to a man sometime in the early 2000s, and unlike the others, he wrote like he was documenting a system. Water from the creek was safe if boiled first. A rough map of the property. Which trail ran south? Which section of the back porch needed reinforcement after storms? There were even a few entries about a small town around 15 miles south. Hardware store, gas station, diner, post office, population low, people decent. I read that line twice. People decent. It sounded almost fictional. Still, I tucked the information away. I wasn't planning to go anywhere yet, but it mattered knowing there was civilization within reach if I needed it. By noon, I had already settled into a routine. Inventory supplies. Straighten the kitchen. Fix the cabinet hinge that hung crooked beside the sink. Sweep out some of the dirt tracked in around the back door. It was stupid how good that felt. Not the chores themselves. The freedom of doing them without commentary. Without somebody leaning in a doorway telling me I was too intense, too quiet, too moody, too much of whatever made them uncomfortable that day. Just my hands. Just work. Just the clean satisfaction of something staying fixed because I fixed it right. That afternoon, I checked out the property again. The air had that sharp, clean edge it only gets in places far away from cities. Pine, damp soil, cold water somewhere nearby. The cabin sat in a wide clearing, ringed by trees so tall they made everything human feel temporary. I followed the sound of water until I found the creek. Narrow but steady, moving over smooth stones in a ribbon of silver light. I crouched beside it and dipped my fingers in. Freezing, real, alive. I sat there longer than I meant to, watching the current, listening, thinking about how Evan and his friends had probably expected the opposite of this. They probably imagined me pacing, crying, furious, desperate. Maybe they were waiting for the perfect moment to come back and film the second half of their little lesson. Maybe they were laughing over brunch somewhere already, replaying the moment they drove off while I screamed after them. That thought should have made me angrier. And it did, but not in the same burning way as yesterday. Yesterday, the humiliation had been raw. Today, it had edges, shape, meaning. I was beginning to understand something ugly. People don't humiliate you because you're weak. They do it because they're offended by the possibility that you might not need them as much as they need your silence. By the time I walked back to the cabin, the sun was lowering and shadows had started stretching long across the clearing. I made more coffee, sat on the porch with one of the old wooden chairs tilted back against the wall, and that was when I saw the light. A white beam flickering between the trees, too steady to be an animal, too low to be moonlight. A flashlight. My whole body went still. For one ridiculous second, I thought maybe it was Evan. Maybe conscience had finally kicked in. Maybe he had come back alone. Maybe he was going to stand there looking guilty and say it went too far and he was sorry. Then I remembered Evan never did guilt unless it benefited him. I set my mug down quietly and stood. The nearest thing within reach was a wrench I'd left on the porch rail after tightening a loose bolt on one of the chairs earlier. I picked it up and stepped forward just as the figure came clear of the trees. Not Evan, an older man, tall, broad through the shoulders despite his age, wearing a flannel jacket and a dark cap. Gray beard, weathered face. Flashlight in one hand, the other lifted slightly when he saw me tense. "Evening," he called out, voice calm and rough. "Didn't mean to scare you." I didn't lower the wrench. "You're a long way from anywhere," I said. He smiled a little. "Could say the same about you." He stopped a few yards from the porch, far enough back not to crowd me. That mattered. Men who understood boundaries usually didn't need to announce it. "Name's Earl," he said. "I live a few miles west of here. Saw chimney smoke yesterday. Figured I'd come check whether somebody finally rented this place again." I studied him for another second, then lowered the wrench but kept it in my hand. "Riley," I said. He nodded once, like that was enough. No intrusive questions, no weird jokes, no lingering look trying to measure me. Just simple acknowledgement. I found myself relaxing by accident. Earl glanced at the cabin, then back at me. "You staying out here alone?" There were a dozen ways I could have answered that. Most of them would have made me sound pathetic. So I went with the truth. "I got left here." One eyebrow lifted. "Left?" "Cabin trip," I said. "Boyfriend, his friends. They thought abandoning me in the woods would be funny. Supposed to build character, apparently." I pulled the crumpled yellow note from my pocket and held it up. Earl stared at it for a beat, then shook his head slowly. "Well," he said, "that's one way to tell on yourself." A laugh slipped out of me before I could stop it. It was the first real laugh I'd had since I got there. He noticed, didn't comment on it, just shifted the canvas bag off his shoulder and set it on the porch steps. "Brought a few things," he said. "Figured whoever was up here might need them. Canned goods, extra flashlight, batteries." I looked down at the bag, then back at him. "You always hand supplies to strangers in the woods?" "Only the ones who look like they've had a worse week than I have." That got another laugh out of me, quieter this time. He smiled then, but not in a way that asked anything from me. Not performative, not charming. Just human. I set the wrench down on the railing. "That bad, huh?" He gave me an easy shrug. "You're standing on a porch gripping a tool like you're deciding whether tonight ends in conversation or assault, so I'd say you've had a day or two." I leaned against the post and exhaled. When he didn't push, didn't pry, I found myself telling him the rest. The trip, the weirdness in the SUV, the fake smiles, the note, the laughter, the way the whole thing had been choreographed like I was the punchline. Earl listened without interrupting. Just stood there in the fading light, one hand resting on the strap of his bag, face set in that calm, unreadable way older people get when they've seen enough of human stupidity to stop acting shocked by it. When I finally finished, he let out a slow breath through his nose. "You picked the wrong man," he said. I blinked. "What?" "You picked the wrong man," he repeated. "Or maybe he picked the wrong woman to underestimate." I looked away for a second because that one landed harder than it should have. Maybe because nobody had spoken to me like that in a very long time. Not as fragile. Not as difficult. Not as somebody who needed correcting. Just as a person who had been wronged. Earl nodded toward the back of the cabin. "There's an old shed back there, half swallowed by vines. Used to belong to the original owners. Might be tools inside, might be junk. Roof's rough, though, so watch your step." "I saw it," I said. "Haven't checked it yet." "Worth a look." He clicked his flashlight off and on, once in his hand. "This place always keeps more than it shows right away." Something about the way he said it made me think he wasn't just talking about the cabin. I crossed my arms against the growing cold. "You from around here your whole life?" "Close enough." He glanced toward the trees. "Long enough to know quiet either saves you or scares you. Usually depends on what you were running from." That settled between us for a second. I didn't answer, mostly because I wasn't sure. Was I running from Evan? From the city? From the life I'd built by letting other people define me? Maybe all of it. Earl didn't wait for a response. He just nudged the bag closer with the toe of his boot. "You boil creek water before drinking it. Weather turns fast out here, and if that old fireplace starts smoking into the room, open the flue wider before you curse at it. It won't listen. I smiled despite myself. Good to know. He tipped his head once, satisfied. Then he turned, switched his flashlight back on, and started walking toward the trees. "Hey," I called after him. He glanced back. "Thank you." He gave me a look I still remember. Steady, matter of fact, almost amused. "Try not to die before the weekend," he said. "You seem like you're just getting interesting." Then he disappeared into the dark. I stood there a long time after he was gone, listening to the woods settle around me, staring at the bag on my porch. Canned food, batteries, a better flashlight, small things, basic things. But the weight of them sat oddly heavy in my chest. Because kindness, when you haven't had much of it, can feel almost as disorienting as cruelty. I carried the bag inside and set it on the kitchen table. Then I lit the fire, heated soup, and thought about the difference between Earl's quiet and Evan's. Evan's silence had always been strategic, punishing, withholding, the kind of silence that made you second-guess what you'd done wrong. Earl's had been the opposite: space, respect, a pause that let me exist without earning it. That night, I slept harder than I had in months. The next morning, sunlight hit my face before I even opened my eyes. For the first time since arriving, I didn't wake up with anger first. Curiosity got there before pain. I made coffee, pulled on my boots, and headed straight for the shed Earl had mentioned. It sat behind the cabin like it had been waiting to be forgotten. Half hidden under vines and brush, door hanging crooked, padlock rusted so badly it looked decorative. I grabbed the handle, gave it one hard pull, and the whole thing came loose with a scrape and a groan. Dust rolled out first. Then the smell hit me. Old wood, oil, metal, memory. The inside was dim, but not empty. Shelves lined one wall, cluttered with rusted tools, cracked paint cans, old jars full of nails and bolts. A workbench sagged in the far corner under the weight of years. Cobwebs stitched the rafters together, and in the center of it all, under a stained tarp, sat something long and unmistakably shaped. My pulse kicked once, then twice. I stepped forward and gripped the edge of the tarp. When I pulled it back, dust exploded into the air around me. Underneath was a car. A Ford Mustang. Mid-70s, maybe. Dust caked, rust blooming around the wheel wells, tires flat enough to look defeated. One headlight cracked, paint dulled with age. And still, beautiful. Not pretty, not polished. Beautiful in the way wounded things sometimes are when you can still see what they used to be and what they might be again. I stared at it for a long moment, then walked a slow circle around it like I was afraid it might vanish if I moved too fast. My fingers drifted over the hood, dragging a line through years of dirt. "Hello," I whispered. Keys hung on a nail beside the workbench. That detail got me. Whoever left it here had meant to come back. Something happened. They never did. I looked at the car again, really looked this time. The rust, the neglect, the bones still holding. My throat tightened before I could stop it. Because suddenly it wasn't just a car sitting in a forgotten shed. It was a mirror, something useful once, left behind, expected to rot quietly, and still somehow not finished. A smile pulled at my mouth before I even realized it was happening. A real one, not the fake social version. Not the tired, polite one I used around Evan's friends to keep the peace. A real smile, sharp with possibility. "Well," I said out loud, voice echoing softly in the shed, "guess I found my next project." The silence held for a second. Then the wind moved through the broken boards overhead, and I swear the whole place seemed to breathe with me. For the first time since that SUV disappeared down the dirt road, I felt it clearly. Not just survival, not just stubbornness, excitement. Whatever Evan and his friends thought they had done to me out here, they were already losing control of the story. Because the woman they left behind on purpose was starting to notice something terrifying. She liked the quiet. She liked the work. And she was beginning to remember exactly who she was when nobody was around to make her feel small. I stood in that shed with dust on my boots and oil in the air, looking at that old Mustang like it had been waiting for me, as long as I'd been waiting for myself. And deep in my gut, something shifted again. This time it felt less like pain, more like a door unlocking. I barely slept that night, not because of fear, because of anticipation. That Mustang sat in my head like a thought I couldn't shut off. Lines, structure, possibility. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it under that tarp again, buried but not gone. By sunrise, I was already outside, coffee in one hand, flashlight in the other, moving through the cold morning air toward the shed like it owed me something. I pulled the tarp off slower this time, letting the dust settle, letting myself really see it. It was rough, no pretending otherwise. Rust creeping along the edges, tires sagging. interior torn in places like time had taken small bites out of it over the years. But the frame? Still solid. The engine? I popped the hood and leaned in. Greasy, old, half seized by the look of it. But not dead. Not even close. A slow smile spread across my face. "Yeah," I murmured, running my fingers lightly along the edge of the engine block. "You're not done yet." I didn't realize how much I needed that until that exact moment. Something broken, but fixable. Something left behind, but still worth the work. I grabbed what tools I could salvage from the shelves. Most were stiff with rust, but usable after a little persuasion. I found a rag, wiped down the worst of the grime, and started with the basics. Fuel system first. The tank smelled like varnish. Old gas, turned thick and useless. I drained what I could, swapped out the filter with one I managed to piece together from spare parts, and poured in a bit of fuel I found in an old container tucked behind the workbench. Battery was dead, completely. But there was a charger in the corner of the shed, ancient but intact. I carried it out, set up a makeshift workspace on the porch, and connected everything like muscle memory had never left me. Hours passed. I didn't check the time. Didn't check my phone. Didn't think about Evan, or his friends, or the note. Just work. Hands moving. Mind focused. For the first time in years, I wasn't fixing something under pressure. I wasn't racing a clock. I wasn't being watched. I was just building. By afternoon, grease coated my hands and forearms. My hair was tied up in a loose knot that had already started falling apart, and I was smiling. Actually smiling. I left the battery charging overnight. The next morning, I woke up before the sun even cleared the trees. No alarm, no obligation, just purpose. I bolted the battery back in, double-checked the connections, then slid into the driver's seat. The leather cracked under me. The steering wheel felt worn, familiar in a way I couldn't explain. I turned the key. Nothing, not even a click. I exhaled slowly. "Okay," I muttered. "We're doing this the hard way." Back out. Hood up. I cleaned the spark plugs as best I could. Tapped the starter lightly. Adjusted the carburetor with a screwdriver that barely deserved the name. Then I tried again. The engine coughed. Once, then died. But that was enough. That sound. That small, stubborn resistance against being forgotten. It lit something in my chest. "Come on," I whispered. "Don't quit on me now." Again. The engine sputtered. Shook. A deep, rough sound clawed its way up from inside the machine, like it was dragging itself back into the world. Then, it caught. Loud. Ugly. Alive. A cloud of gray smoke burst out from the exhaust, thick and bitter. I laughed. Out loud. A sharp, bright sound that echoed off the trees. "That's it," I said, leaning forward, hand on the wheel. "That's it." I let it idle. Listened. Felt it. Every vibration, every uneven rhythm. It wasn't perfect. Not even close. But it was running. And somehow, that felt bigger than just a car starting. It felt like something in me had restarted too. Over the next few days, I worked on it whenever the light allowed. Cleaned what I could. Replaced what I couldn't. Improvised where I had to. I bled the brakes. Filled the tires with air using that little compressor in the shed. Patched the seat just enough to not feel like I'd fall through it. By the time I was done, it wasn't pretty. But it was drivable, and that was enough. I packed a couple of cans of food, filled 2 jugs with boiled creek water, grabbed the map from the journal, and decided to see if that town 15 miles south actually existed. The drive out was slow, careful. The dirt path rattled the whole frame like it was testing my confidence with every turn. But the Mustang held. When the tires finally hit pavement, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Good girl," I murmured, patting the dashboard lightly. A few minutes later, the world changed. Buildings, faded signs, a gas station that looked like it hadn't updated since the 80s, a general store, and a diner with a flickering open sign in the window. People, real people, standing outside, talking, living. As I pulled up, heads turned. Not because of me, because of the car. I parked out front and stepped out, wiping my hands on my jeans out of habit. My phone buzzed. I froze. For the first time since the cabin, I had signal. 3 bars. And immediately, notifications exploded across the screen. Messages, missed calls, voicemails. I stared at it for a second, then locked the phone without opening anything. Not yet. Inside the diner, the smell hit me first. Coffee. Grease. Something fried and familiar. I ordered the cheapest thing on the menu and ate like I hadn't seen real food in days. Halfway through, I noticed the waitress watching me. Curious. Not judgmental. Just interested. "You new around here?" she finally asked. "Sort of," I said. "Sort of?" "Got left at a cabin up north," I added casually. Her eyebrows lifted. "Left?" "Long story." She smiled slightly. "Well, you're not the first." That caught my attention. "People get abandoned out here often?" Not often, she said, but often enough that we don't ask too many questions anymore. That should have felt strange. Instead, it felt comforting. No interrogation, no assumptions, just acceptance. After I finished eating, a man stepped out from the back. Big, bearded, looked like he could lift an engine block without blinking. You the one who drove that Mustang out front? He asked. Yeah. You fix it yourself? Yeah. He nodded once. You free tomorrow? I shrugged. Depends. He jerked his thumb toward the back. Got a truck that won't start. Been sitting for weeks. Can't afford to tow it into the city. I stood up. I'll take a look. That was it. No resume. No interview. Just skill recognized for what it was. The next morning, I showed up early. The truck was worse than I expected, but not impossible. 20 minutes in, I found the problem. Cracked fuel line. Bad gasket. Simple. Fixable. An hour later, it was running. The man, Rick, I learned, just stared at it. Then at me. You're hired, he said. Just like that. I blinked. For what? For whatever you're willing to do. I'll pay cash. Feed you. You help me keep things running. I felt something strange settle in my chest. Not excitement. Not relief. Something steadier. Respect. Deal, I said. And just like that, everything started to shift. Word spread. Fast. By the third day, someone from the gas station asked me to look at their Jeep. Then someone else. Then another. People started calling me the mechanic from the woods. Not as a joke. As a story. As something earned. Meanwhile, my phone kept buzzing. I ignored it for 2 days. Then one night, sitting on the porch of the cabin, I finally opened it. Messages from Evan stacked on top of each other. At first, light. Playful. Okay, haha, you proved your point. Come back now. Then annoyed. You're dragging this out. Then irritated. People are asking where you are. Then angry. You're embarrassing me. Then mean. Stop acting like a child. I scrolled slowly, reading each one, feeling less and less connected to the person they were written for, because the version of me he was talking to didn't exist anymore. Not out here. I locked the phone again, set it face down on the table, and went back to cleaning a carburetor I'd taken apart earlier that afternoon. Metal, oil, structure, things that made sense. A week passed, then another. And one day, I realized something that stopped me cold in the middle of tightening a bolt. I hadn't thought about going back. Not once. Not seriously. Not even in passing. The job. The apartment. Evan. All of it felt distant. Like something I used to carry that I'd finally set down without noticing. That night, I checked my phone again. More messages. The last one sat at the bottom of the screen. If you stay there, don't bother coming back. We're done. I stared at it for a long time. Then I laughed. Soft. Quiet. Real. Finally, I whispered. Not heartbreak. Not panic. Relief. I set the phone aside and leaned back in the chair, staring out at the trees. They had wanted a reaction. Wanted me to break. Wanted me to come crawling back, grateful for the chance to be included again. Instead, they had removed everything that was suffocating me and left me alone long enough to remember how to breathe. I stood up, walked back into the shed, and tightened the last bolt on the carburetor. Turned the key. The engine came alive instantly. Smooth. Steady. Strong. I smiled to myself. Guess I'm not the one who needed fixing. And for the first time in my life, that didn't feel like a defense. It felt like the truth. A few weeks passed before they came back. By then, the cabin didn't feel like a place I was stuck in anymore. It felt like mine. Not legally. Not officially. But in every way that actually mattered. I had a routine. Mornings started early. Coffee on the porch. Air still cold enough to wake me up better than caffeine ever could. Then the drive into town. The Mustang rumbling beneath me, like it had something to prove. Work with Rick. A steady flow of repairs. Hands busy. Mind quiet. People there didn't ask me to explain myself. They didn't need me to be softer, or louder, or easier to fit into their version of normal. They just needed me to do the job. And when I did, they looked me in the eye and said thank you like it actually meant something. I didn't realize how starved I'd been for that until I had it. So when I pulled up to the cabin that afternoon and saw the SUV parked crooked in the dirt, I didn't feel fear or panic, just clarity. The engine idled for a second before I turned it off. 6 figures stood near the porch, familiar silhouettes, too clean, too put together, like they had stepped out of a catalog titled People Who Don't Think They Did Anything Wrong. Evan stood at the front, hands on his hips, weight shifting from one foot to the other like he was rehearsing something in his head. Maddie stood beside him, arms crossed, that same tight little smile she always wore when she thought she was winning something invisible. The others hovered behind them, trying to look concerned. Trying. I sat there for a second longer, just watching them, taking it in. The contrast. Them. Polished, performative, rehearsed. Me. Grease on my hands, dirt on my boots, sun on my skin. For the first time, I didn't feel out of place. They did. I opened the door and stepped out slowly, wiping my hands on a rag. Wow, I said, letting my gaze drift across them. You guys get lost or just remembered I exist? Evan exhaled like he'd been holding that in. We didn't think you'd actually stay out here, he said. No hello, no apology. Just that. I nodded once. Yeah, that seems to be a theme. Maddie rolled her eyes. Oh my God, can we not do this right away? I leaned against the car, folding my arms. Do what? This, she gestured vaguely at me. Attitude. I let out a quiet laugh. You mean reacting like a person who got abandoned in the woods? Evan stepped forward slightly, lowering his voice like he was trying to sound reasonable. It was a joke that went too far. I tilted my head. Too far? He hesitated. Yeah. I pushed off the car and took a few steps closer. You mean the part where you left me without warning, miles from anywhere, with no signal? He opened his mouth, closed it again. Maddie jumped in. We left you food, she said quickly. It's not like we put you in danger. You clearly survived. I stared at her for a second, just long enough for her smile to falter a little. You're right, I said evenly. I did. Something in my tone made the others shift slightly. Evan tried again, softer this time. Look, you proved your point, okay? We get it. You're upset. Let's just go home. Home. That word landed strangely, like it didn't belong to me anymore. I glanced past them at the cabin, then back at him. I am home. His expression tightened immediately. Don't start with that. Start with what? This whole independence act, he said, frustration creeping into his voice. You don't belong here, Riley. I felt something settle inside me then. Solid, unmovable. Funny, I said quietly. I was starting to think I didn't belong there. Maddie huffed. Unbelievable. One of the others stepped forward, trying to smooth things over. Okay, this doesn't have to turn into a whole thing, she said. We came because we care. We wanted to fix this. I looked at her. Really looked. At the careful tone. The curated concern. You cared so much, I said. You waited until I was asleep to leave. Silence. The kind that doesn't have anywhere to go. Evan's jaw tightened. You're overreacting. There it was. That word. That familiar, dismissive little label. I smiled. Not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. No, I said. I reacted exactly how you expected me to. He frowned. What does that mean? You thought I'd panic, I continued. Thought I'd call, beg, show up embarrassed and grateful for the chance to be included again. Maddie scoffed. Oh, please. But I didn't, I said. That landed. Harder than anything else so far. Evan stepped closer, voice sharper now. You're making this way bigger than it is. Am I? Yes, he snapped. It was supposed to teach you something. I let out a slow breath, then nodded. It did. That stopped him. Even Maddie didn't interrupt. For the first time since they arrived, nobody had a ready response. So I gave them one. You told me to build some character, I said, and I did. The silence stretched. I could see it in their faces. That moment when the script they came with stopped working. When the version of me they expected didn't show up. Evan's expression shifted. Not softer, not understanding. Something closer to unsettled? You're being dramatic, he said, but there was less confidence behind it now. I shook my head. No, I said quietly. I'm being honest. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once like he was trying to reset control of the situation. Look, he said, forcing his voice calmer. You've had your time out here. You've cooled off. That's good. But this... He gestured around at the cabin, the trees, the quiet. This isn't your life. I glanced at my hands. Grease still under my nails. Small cuts from work. Evidence of something real. Then I looked back at him. Why not? He blinked. Because it's not. That's not an answer. It's not realistic, he said, frustration rising again. You have a job, a place, a life. Had, I corrected. He stared at me. You're throwing everything away over a joke. I let out a soft laugh. No, I said. You threw it away. That hit. Maddie shifted uncomfortably. One of the others looked down. Evan's voice dropped, sharper now. You're embarrassing me. There it was. Not concern. Not regret. Embarrassment. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I said. You said that in your messages too. His eyes flicked toward my pocket instinctively. You've been ignoring me. I've been busy. Doing what? Maddie cut in. Playing survivalist? Working, I said. That made her pause. Working? In town, I added. Fixing cars. Evan frowned. You drove out of here? Yeah. In what? I jerked my thumb toward the Mustang behind me. All 6 of them turned. Really looked at it for the first time. The silence that followed was different. Not dismissive. Not amused. Surprised. You fixed that? One of them asked. Yeah. Evan stared at the car, then back at me. You've been, what, living out here, working odd jobs? Pretty much. And you think that's better? Maddie said. I met her gaze. Yes. No hesitation. No explanation. Just truth. That seemed to irritate her more than anything else I'd said. Evan stepped closer again. This isn't sustainable, Riley. Neither was I. That stopped him cold. For a second I saw it. A crack. Not in his argument. In his understanding. Like he genuinely hadn't considered that I might have been unhappy before this. That's not fair, he said finally. Neither was what you did. He exhaled sharply. Fine, he said. You want to stay here and prove a point? Go ahead. But don't expect me to sit around waiting while you... I'm not asking you to wait. That cut him off mid-sentence. Silence. Then, what? I'm not coming back, I said. Simple. Clear. Final. His face shifted again. This time there was no performance left. Just disbelief. You're serious? Yes. Over this? Because of this. Maddie let out a sharp laugh. Unbelievable. Evan's voice dropped. You're really going to throw away our relationship over one mistake? I looked at him for a long moment. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Was it a mistake? He hesitated. That was enough. I nodded. Yeah, I said softly. That's what I thought. The wind moved through the trees. A loose board on the porch creaked under my weight as I stepped back, creating space, choosing distance. Evan's voice changed then. Less controlled. More desperate. You're ruining everything we built. I tilted my head slightly. What did we build? He didn't answer. Because we both knew. We hadn't built anything. We had maintained something. A routine. A version of a relationship that worked as long as I stayed quiet enough not to disrupt it. I just wanted you to be better, he said finally. I nodded slowly. You got your wish. He frowned. What? I am better, I said. Just not for you. That landed deeper than anything else. No anger. No yelling. Just truth. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Maddie huffed loudly. This is a waste of time, she muttered. We drove all the way out here for nothing. I shrugged. Yeah, I said. You did. Evan stood there a second longer, looking at me like he was trying to find the version of me he recognized. The one who would soften. Apologize. Come back. She wasn't there anymore. Finally, he turned. The others followed. Doors slammed. Engine started. And just like the first time, they left. Dust rose behind the SUV as it disappeared down the road. But this time I didn't run after it. Didn't shout. Didn't feel that hot, crushing wave of humiliation. I just stood there, watched it go, then turned back toward the cabin, toward the quiet, toward the life I had started building with my own hands. I wiped my hands on the rag again and let out a slow breath. Build some character, I murmured. A small smile pulled at my mouth. Yeah, I said, I did. Then I walked inside and didn't look back. 6 months later, my life didn't look anything like it used to. And for the first time, that didn't scare me. It felt right. The cabin wasn't temporary anymore. It wasn't a place I was surviving in. It was mine. I ended up buying it from the owner, a retired logger who seemed more confused than anything that someone actually wanted the place. You sure about this? He asked me the day we signed the papers. Most people can't handle this kind of quiet. I smiled a little when he said it. I'm not most people. He chuckled, shaking his head. Guess not. If you can stand it, it's yours. I signed that same day. The Mustang came with it. Apparently, no one had claimed it in years. The title was exactly where I found it, tucked in the glove box, waiting for someone who cared enough to look. So I kept it, fixed it properly this time. Not just running, restored. It sat outside the cabin now, clean enough to reflect sunlight, engine smooth, steady, reliable. A reminder of what patience can bring back, of what doesn't stay broken if you refuse to leave it that way. Work in town had grown faster than I expected. Rick introduced me to Dale, an older mechanic who had been running a one-man garage for years and was finally ready to slow down. We clicked immediately. Same mindset, same no-nonsense approach to work, same quiet understanding that people deserved honesty more than performance. A few weeks after we met, he made me an offer. Split the rent, he said. Help me run the place. We build something that actually works. So we did. We called it Iron Ridge Auto. No flashy sign. No marketing. Just word of mouth. And somehow that was enough. People came. Then more people came. Then even more. From nearby towns. From places I hadn't even heard of before. They didn't come because we were cheap. They came because we didn't treat them like they were stupid. Because we fixed things right. Because we didn't lie. Because we looked them in the eye and meant it when we said we'd take care of it. Respect. It turned out that was the one thing I'd been missing all along. And once I had it, I couldn't imagine going back to anything less. As for Evan, his version of the story found its way back to me eventually, through a mutual acquaintance online. According to him, I had some kind of breakdown, couldn't handle pressure, ran away from my responsibilities. He told people he had tried to help me, but I refused. That I'd changed. That I wasn't the same person anymore. On that last part, he was right. I didn't correct him. Didn't argue. Didn't reach out. People like Evan don't need truth. They need a version of events that protects how they see themselves. Let him have it. Meanwhile, I had my own version, and mine didn't need explaining. The seasons changed slowly out there. Leaves shifted color. Air sharpened, then softened again. Time moved, but it didn't rush. And somewhere along the way, I stopped measuring my life by what I had escaped. I started measuring it by what I had built. On the 1-year anniversary of the day they left me at that cabin, I decided to do something small. Not a celebration. Not really. More like acknowledgement. I set up a grill outside, cleaned up the porch, pulled a few extra chairs out of storage, and invited the people who had become part of my life without even trying. Rick came. Dale came. Tom from the hardware store. A couple of regulars from the diner. And Earl. He showed up just before sunset, carrying a small box like he always did. "You didn't die," he said, handing it to me. I smiled. "You sound surprised." "Little disappointed," he replied dryly. Inside the box were fresh batteries. I laughed. Some things didn't need to change. The evening settled in slowly. Food, laughter, stories. Real ones, not curated, not polished. Kids running across the clearing. Someone turning on music low enough that it didn't drown anything out. For the first time in a long time, I was surrounded by people. And I didn't feel like I had to perform. I didn't have to soften myself. Didn't have to shrink. Didn't have to translate who I was into something more acceptable. I just existed. And that was enough. Halfway through the night, my phone buzzed on the table beside me. Unknown number. I stared at it for a second, then picked it up. The message was short. "I heard you bought that place. I hope you're happy." No name. Didn't need one. I looked up. At the porch. At the people. At the Mustang parked just beyond the light. At the trees stretching out into quiet darkness. At a life that no longer felt like something I had to endure. Then I looked back at the screen. I typed 2 words. "I am." I didn't wait for a reply. I deleted the number, set the phone down, and went back to the grill. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the fire had burned low, I sat alone on the porch. Same place, same view, different person. The crickets hummed softly in the background. The air was cool, steady, real. I thought about everything that had happened. The job, the noise, the relationship that had slowly turned into something I didn't recognize. The trip, the note, the laughter. They thought they were teaching me something. Thought they were forcing me to change. And they were right, just not in the way they planned. They didn't break me. They stripped everything away. And in that empty space, I found something I hadn't even realized I'd lost. Myself. I leaned back in the chair, eyes drifting toward the dark outline of the trees. "They freed me," I said quietly. And the strange thing was, I didn't feel angry anymore. Not even a little. Because the biggest favor they ever did for me was leaving. I took a slow breath. Let it out. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anything to change. Everything already had.